So I'm here with Tom Michalak, who's with the United Auto Workers Local 1248. And he's in Detroit on the ground where the GM strike is happening. So, Tom, can you explain to me and the viewers what exactly the strike is about? What has motivated the GM auto workers to go out on strike?
Sure, of course. There's a long history of, at least long before I've even been hired, of cutbacks, deterioration in conditions, sort of a sense that we have to continue to sacrifice in order for our respective companies to remain profitable. So, given all that, you can only really take so much, so to speak. The main issues on the table right now are concerning our healthcare and the use of temporary workers that are used indefinitely, not on a temporary basis. They're worked in a full-time capacity, but are designated a different way. So you can find yourself working side by side with someone who doesn't have the same rights as you, doesn't make as much money as you, and they can be fired on a whim and so on. So those are the main things. The overall environment that's been allowed to persist for several decades, as well as these two immediate issues on the table.
Okay. And what's the atmosphere like on the picket lines?
People are really excited. I mean, they're not like really large pickets themselves. I've been working at Chrysler for coming on 5 years, and it's only in the context of sort of people feeling under siege and wanting to strike, you know? So for the first time, I think first time in a long time, people are able to exercise their right to strike, and a lot of people are really excited about it.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you've heard, and this is a very common argument that people make, where people say, well, hey, you know, these UAW auto workers, right, they have way better health benefits than everybody else, way higher pay compared to teachers, compared to other people. You know, they have it too good. They're very entitled. What do you say in response to people who make that kind of argument?
I think that they should, I'd ask that person what they think should happen, if people should be brought down to a certain point. I don't know if everybody should be making minimum wage. Is the minimum wage too high? I mean, I don't know. There is a lot of falsehood around what your average UAW worker makes anyway. Like even on the local news, just the last night or the night before, they were showing like what it means, like bullet points of what it means to be on strike, how much GM is reportedly losing, things like that. But the last bullet point was how much a UAW member is making while on strike, and it said that we're making $250 a day while on strike. So that not only is not true, it's $250 a week after the 8th day of being on strike, first of all.
Wow.
But it's not just a mistake. It's like there is this conception that's based in something. It's not just fiction, but there is this conception that, you know, UAW workers, like the reason why even the auto plants left in the first place is because the UAW got too greedy, and, you know, we're just living high on the hog. But that's really a misconception. It's I will say that the degree to which an auto worker lives well is a direct result of collective bargaining and decades of struggle. But even then, there hasn't been a pay raise in, I want to say, 14 years. Well, long before I've started working there. And effectively, if you don't get a pay raise, you get a pay cut as far as inflation, cost of living, and these other things. So the standard of living of an auto worker isn't even what it used to be, let alone, you know, high on the hog living, you know.
Now, one thing I've also heard is people from around the world have asked, well, why is there not like solidarity strikes going on? Right? Why are the workers at different plants not all just walking out? And then I have to point out to those people that there's this thing called the Taft-Hartley labor law that outlaws solidarity strikes. Can you talk about how this law has basically crippled organized labor in the United States and their ability to fight back?
Sure. Yeah, there's the Taft-Hartley Act was a devastating blow to the labor movement. Sort of one of the opening shots of the Cold War, even, like as far as like the global battle of labor versus capital. In a domestic sense, that was one of the first blows. I believe that was passed in 1947 under President Truman. Yeah, like you said, it has stipulations concerning boycotting businesses while there's ongoing strikes. As you mentioned, other unions participating in the strike of another union. Even a law uh, banning people who do not renounce membership of the Communist Party, whether they are or not. Although I believe that was ruled unconstitutional in the 60s. So I don't know if that's still in effect. But yeah, that's been a major demand of the labor movement. An ongoing demand is the repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act.
You know, I remember when I was living in Detroit in 2008, and I was there during the American Axle strike that briefly happened. And I remember Barack Obama was running for president at that point. And Barack Obama was promising to pass this Employee Free Choice Act, which would roll back a lot of the repression of the Taft-Hartley law, and it didn't happen. But everyone in Detroit was very excited.
He did pass himself off as a friend of labor, and a lot of people in Detroit bought that. There's even like what was the tagline for the 2012 campaign? GM is alive and Osama bin Laden is dead.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask about is we've seen this story going around claiming that Trump is negotiating somehow on behalf of the auto workers. But we now have the White House and GM both saying that's fake news. That just didn't happen. But yet we see a Politico headline. We see all these rumors going around that Trump is sticking up for the auto workers. And now everyone's saying that's not true. What's going on here? Why is that all over the news and then everyone's confirming it's false?
I don't know the origins of that. That is a goofy story, but you know there are people, however many people in the country who are probably still believing it, despite the White House themselves denying it. Some people are more Donald Trump than Donald Trump is, so I think they'll believe it indefinitely.
What's the community support for the strike like? Has there been community solidarity pickets? Are there people in the community coming out? Can you describe what that's been like?
Well, like people who are driving by the pickets, they'll often honk in support. And unfortunately, there is that sense. I mean, it's not completely ubiquitous, but there is somewhat of a sense of, as you mentioned earlier, well, they make all this money, meanwhile I don't. Like, why would I support them? So, I mean, it's a mixed bag. But anything that concerns the big three locally is just by default, it's big news. So it's something that most people know about in some capacity, whether they see it on the evening news or know someone who's involved one way or another with the auto industry. So everybody knows that GM is a greedy company. In some people's minds, it's who they're all greedy, or who's greedier than the other. You know, there's some of that.
The UAW has a long history of organizing not just around issues in the auto plants, but they were main sponsors of Martin Luther King and his demonstrations for civil rights. And that they were sponsors of Students for a Democratic Society, the radical activist group in the 1960s. I know, and then you have the Drum organization that formed among black auto workers in the 60s. It sounds like the UAW has a very long history of being involved in all kinds of struggles for social justice.
That's true. That's most definitely true. Now I'd say it's somewhat limited. Joining the UAW, we had to go through like an orientation with the union and the company and so on, and they did advertise that history of struggle. Interestingly, they also emphasized how no matter what you heard, the UAW has nothing to do with communism, which I think to everyone in the audience were like, what? Like nobody said it was. Like what do you mean? But it's less so now. I mean, it's the occasional Democratic Party activism to get so and so elected, or the largest UAW action that I've seen outside of direct plant-related issues was an anti-Trump rally in September 2016. It was a fairly large, relatively large demonstration that the UAW initiated. They're not super politically active. My opinion is that the UAW has, at worst, a cut off the limb to protect the body kind of mentality, where they're not going to go out on a limb on a whole lot. They play it very, very, very safe, and that's probably putting it charitably. They put it very safe. They don't try to make too many waves. Not very bold.
Okay.
But it's a bold move. I mean, I'm actually surprised that there's a strike going on of at least one branch of the big three, and we still don't know what's going to happen with Ford or FCA. My contract was extended indefinitely. That could mean anything, but I'm hoping that what that means is that we're waiting to see what goes on with GM.
Well, where can people follow and get good information on the strike and get up to date, details about what's going on the ground? Who would be a good resource to turn to? What blogs? What social media? What websites?
I mean, even if just checking the Detroit Free Press or the Detroit News, you'll get very basic information as far as the goings on. There's one page that's in part run by someone in my local on Facebook called UAW GM Ford FCA Real Talk. They're UAW guys who are hostile to management, put it that way. And some of them are on the ground at the various pickets.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you'll keep us updated. Maybe we'll have you back on if the strike intensifies. And I'll be posting this on YouTube, so it should be good. Thanks for talking to us, Tom.